Parking my motorcycle in front of a motel at the end of a long day on the road could certainly be sweet, like finally exhaling a breath I had been holding all day. But best of all was setting out in the morning. Whatever torments the night had brought, whatever weather the new day threw at me, when I loaded up the bike and swung my leg over the saddle, my whole perspective changed. Focus tightened into the mechanics and mentality of operating the machine, and awareness contracted to that demanding paradigm. Then, as I let in the clutch and turned the throttle, my worldview expanded as I moved into a whole new paradigm of landscapes, highways, and wildlife. Infinite possibilities.
Peart, legendary drummer and lyricist for Rush, has died at the age of 67. Peart passed away on Tuesday after a quiet battle with cancer.
Should Rush ever reform? Why am I asking this question? Because on Facebook and various other places on the internet, I've seen posts popping up here and there, sort of alluding to the fact that Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee, the surviving members of Rush, are open to the fact of getting back together.
Hi, we're going back on tour. So we'll see you soon.
I am going through a renaissance when it comes to Rush. I have to say it. Recent events has, in my duties as a music YouTuber, has taken me back to those albums again. But this time I don't know what it is. My connection to these Rush albums, primarily the albums that run from the debut in 1974 up to probably Signals, those albums, it's as though they've been wired into my DNA. And the love I feel for this music when I put it on is never ending. And I can put a Rush album on from that period. And if I'm critical of Grace Under Pressure onwards, there's some great music there, but it's not wound into my DNA. And I don't just think that's subjective. I think it's something more. I think there's a magic on those records, and it represents something that no other band represents. And so, a few nights ago, I think 2 nights ago, this tour that we've been talking about a lot on this channel, they did the first leg of the tour over at the Kia Forum in Los Angeles, where they signed off 10 years ago or so. And of course, in this modern age, very quickly, we had hundreds of very high quality video going up of the gig with audio quality that in the old days we would have paid a lot of money for the bootleg of that quality. I started to grab little bits here and there and started to edit them together so I would get multiple camera angles, you know, just for my own pleasure. And I included just a little bit of that at the beginning of this video because the internet, it allows people to get so involved creatively involved around this happening. And I don't know with Rush, because Rush are always known of having so much control over their material and making sure everything was absolutely perfect, technically played, brilliant. So now we get to see them in the raw, you know, from every angle possible. And not only that, we get to see them where they've got someone stepping into the seat of Neil Peart. I watched the footage, and I suppose this video is going to be a reaction about that. Everyone's doing it. All the YouTubers have done it. I wasn't going to do it. I feel a bit stupid now because I could have got in earlier. So mine will probably not get the views it should because mine is not going to be a reaction really to that concert. Mine's going to be about something else. It's going to be about something I was going to do a video about. And what that was to celebrate the genius of Neil Peart. For me, as a drummer, his influence on me is unending. To such an extent that Neil Peart opened up such a world of drummers to me because of his chops and ability, that when you then start to get into your Billy Cobbs and your Vinnie Colaiutas, you look back at Neil Peart and think, well, I thought he was the greatest drummer in the world, but he's not. And so Neil Peart has featured in many a overrated drummers list here, something which I have done really to stoke up the ire of Rush fans, because their love of him is incredible. Their love of the band is incredible. But I have that love too. And so to balance that, I really want to discuss what was missing from that gig, which was Neil Peart. Or was he missing? That's the point. Annika Knowles is an incredible drummer. She's a new breed of drummers that have come in after a history of drumming since Neil did his incredible input into drumming. There's been a history of drumming, I would say, starting with drummers like Vinnie Colaiuta, Dave Weckl, and then we got people like Virgil Donati. Then you had your Thomas Langs, your Marco Minimans, and the technical level went up. At the same time, because of drummers like Chris Coleman, you had this gospel chops thing emerging in. You had drummers like Benny Greb, who were all of these were doing really interesting stuff. And then on the hip hop side, you got people like Chris Dave bringing in a sort of polyrhythmical, metric modulated approach, and all these things are mixing together. Drummers emerging now have been schooled by all these different approaches, and not only that, they've been able to get direct access to these approaches because of the internet. A drummer of my era, I learnt by listening to records and snatches of bits in Modern Drummer or Rhythm magazine. So technically, drumming has gone through the roof since Neil Peart's time. Annika Knowles represents the peak of that. Her technique is unfathomable when compared to Neil Peart's. She could do things that Neil Peart could not even dream of. And that's a fact. So her ability to eat this gig is undeniable. She's not going to have any problems with any Rush tunes. Now, having said that, she obviously found herself sat in the most pressured drum gig that has ever existed. I cannot think of another drum gig that is more pressured. I can remember doing my first gig with IQ in Montreal. Now, IQ are nowhere near the size of Rush, but they had a drummer called Paul Cook, who'd been the classic drummer, and I felt I was stepping into his shoes, and it was a very stressful thing to do. And the band was supporting me, and it's saying, just do your thing, Andy, blah, 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 and all that type of stuff. So I've been there playing very similar material, but nowhere like this. I've also sat in Neil Peart's drum chair. I actually have. This is something that's ingrained in me, because a few years later, when I was playing with IQ, we did another gig in Montreal, and when we were playing there, Rush were actually playing at the Great Big Enormo Dome, or whatever it's called, in Montreal, and there's connections between IQ and Rush because Terry Brown produced Are You Sitting Comfortably? And so those connections were utilised, and our lighting engineer, Lol Dyer, love you, Lol, he got in contact with Howard Underlighter, I always want to say Underlighter, I'm sure it's not that, who is their legendary lighted engineer, and we got taken over backstage to be shown around. When I arrived in the sort of backstage dressing room, Howard said, which one's the drummer? And I said, I'm the drummer. And he said, go through that door. There was a door, and I opened the door. There was a dark set of stairs going up. It was quite frightening in a way. And I walked up these stairs, very steep, right, almost like a ladder, up to a trap door. I opened the trap door, and this trap door opened into the centre of the stage in this Enormo Dome in Montreal, and right inside Neil Peart's kit. You couldn't get at Neil Peart's kit from the outside. He was completely encased. He had to come up from underneath. I remember opening that and walking up and look at this kit that I'd, for 40 years I'd salivated over this kit, to And I sort of sat down on the stool. I didn't touch any of it, but I sat down on the stool, and then I looked out at this huge stadium. And then I could see Geddy Lee down on my left, all his stuff set up here. I could see Alex Lifeson on my right, his stuff all set up, and he had his pedal boards, and behind them he had a row of Barbie dolls. And I think some of them were like in Russia type. It was an incredible hair-raising thing. So we could wax lyrical about drummers and say who we like and we don't like. But for me, Neil Peart, this is something else. Now, recently, I've been going back and listening to those classic albums, and there's two things that have been overwhelming for me on this journey. One is the way that I play songs, the way I negotiate my way through an arrangement, and all the tricks I utilise, and all the things that I've been able to use in bands where people go, oh, that's really cool, I like that, what you're doing there. I would say 80% of it came from Neil Peart. Neil Peart played drum parts. He wasn't an improviser like a Billy Cobham or an Omar Hakim. He created parts, and these parts are incredible. Anika Knowles has not created these parts. And in that respect, it's an entirely different thing that she's bringing to it, that Neil brought it. Neil invented his parts. But more than that, he invented and created and was the driving force behind the fundamental message of Rush. It's very interesting for me that Rush are this trio, they're one of the few bands where the lineup never changed. You know, not for decades it never changed. Alex and Geddy obviously really love each other. Absolutely love each other. And as soon as they're together, you pick up on a chemistry which is way more powerful than any other band I can think of. And Neil was a part of that. But Neil always was the late arrival. But what he brought to the table was something entirely different to Alex and Geddy. Alex and Geddy, and I think Alex is the leader of this. Alex is a very silly man, very funny, off the cuff, incredible guitar player. He's one of the greatest guitarists from the classic rock period, and massively underrated, as is Geddy Lee as a bass player, singer, keyboardist. They're all so underrated, I believe, really. But Geddy is quieter, and he almost acts as a conduit between Alex and Neil. But what Neil does is he brings in this lyrical aspect, which then becomes the message of the band. You never feel that Geddy goes, well, I'll just sing these words, but I don't get them, I don't care of them. Now, in listening to the Rush albums as I have been recently, there is a joy and exploration of the sense of our personal freedom, of our personal expression. And that goes up against the conformist establishment. That's a very strong message in Rush, and it's almost like my basic aesthetic viewpoint of the world. They look at technology, they look at history, they look at politics, and they explain it all. If you put on side one of Permanent Waves and just sit back and listen to it, it starts up with Alex Lifeson musically expressing radio waves. And with that guitar part, you hear the radio waves. You suddenly feel they're in the air. And then Geddy says, invisible airwaves crackle with life. And as he says this, music and lyrics create this incredible bond. And I cannot think of a band that really does this in the way that Rush do it, because you have to have a trio where the communication is so quick and where that communication is all behind the same message. Now, we know that the establishment, the snotty establishment with their fashion and elitism, have looked down on Rush for 50 years. Right? The fact that their fan base was intelligent boys made it even worse. But intelligent boys, I'm afraid, make the world go round, okay? And so a whole generation of us were having the doors open to a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, say in Spirit of the Radio, just to take that tune, there is a quote that comes from Simon and Garfunkel. And so when I heard Simon and Garfunkel with the paraphrase that Rush used, I went, oh, Rush listened to Simon and Garfunkel, and that drew me to Simon and Garfunkel, right? But this song celebrating the freedom of joy that's in music, but the fact that there's this thing threatening it the whole time, which is the labels and the establishment, and they want this and they want that, you know. But of course, glittering prizes and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity. Yeah. Right? These lyrics are imprinted on my brain. Not Bob Dylan's, not Leonard Cohen's. I have said here I'm lyric blind. And I think I am to a certain extent. But I believe the song should transport the lyrics to you. The song should transport the lyrics in that the music is so incredible that the message is in both the music and the lyrics together, so it's delivered to you. We then follow that up with Free Will. Now, free will's interesting because it explores the idea of, you know, it's a philosophical concept, which when I first bought Permanent Waves, I never thought about. But now I have read so many different philosophers on this. You know, is the world predestined or do we have a free will? This was a discussion I was having on Facebook, and I was there typing out, you know, we are predestined, but we have the sense of a free will, and our free will actually brings about the predestination. It's part of it. And so you must embrace your free will as though it is free, but it's within the... I'm trying to go with this. And the thing is that this can't be solved, and it's a huge philosophical issue, and it's emotive. But what Rush are doing here is like they're educating. You listen to that, and it's like a song which lays out the basic tenets of the problems with believing in a free will or, you know, believing in predestination. But it also brings a religious aspect into it. And this is a rock band questioning religion, questioning the validity of it. All that is wrapped up in this tune, which also has one of the most incredible guitar solos. In the middle of this, Rush just drop down into 6 and they just blow. Bass, guitar, drums. This is basically Cream. They are Cream at that moment, but I don't think there's been a power trio that can play together with that much fire. I don't think there is one. Maybe the Jimi Hendrix experience, perhaps. But my God, it's just so beautiful. But don't get sidetracked by the music, because after this exploration of all these different religions, we then get one of Rush's greatest moments, Jacob's Ladder, which for me is one of the last prog epics they did, but was infused with more maturity than they'd ever had before. And it seems to pull harmonically from Philip Glass. They have reduced everything down. It's quite minimal at the same time being an epic. And it explores basically the idea of an ascension to heaven. You know, Brad Meldau, the jazz pianist, created a whole album based around this concept. In one respect, it can be seen almost like the precursor to Camerite, in that it's just a sort of photograph of a pastoral scene. It's like Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, and what you see is a storm emerge out of that. But within that, within the shafts of light that they describe so eloquently, we get a feeling of the spiritual, balancing free will and the questioning of organised religion. And that's coming out of this idea that freedom really is in music. And if I take that side one of Permanent Waves, that's almost like my worldview. It's like everything we talk about here, in case of an album that's immaculately played and brilliantly produced. I can wax on about Bavish Nuxtra, Return to Forever, or John Coltrane and Miles Davis, but none of those have quite made music like this. And we don't want to say that. We want to see Rush as being great, you know, Maybe a little bit overblown, sometimes a little bit pretentious, but really interesting. No. For me, I have to be honest. If I take what's in my heart, this is as good as it gets. I had a long drive up north, and I had Exit Stage left on. It's all I'm listening to at the moment is Rush. And when they do Jacob's Ladder live, and the inside bit, the bit that sounds like the Mavish Orchestra, where you get these great big churning arpeggios, and it's so dark. I was in tears. This is some of the most profound music I can think of. Now, that's the combination of the band and the band dynamics, everything that's going on, but it's also Neil Peart plays a part in that takes him beyond the comparison to a Billy Cobham or an Omar Hakim. Neil Peart's importance as a musician is unique in the history of music, really. It really is. And he was such a quiet and humble man, and a thoughtful man, and really different to Alex and Geddy in a way, creating not a dialectic, a sublime trinity. Because the dialectics we have, of course, this thing I say that happens in the arts where you've got these two things fighting against each other. And it would be very easy to say, here's Neil Peart and here's Alex Lifeson. They're in symbiosis, but they represent two sides of this dialectic, you know. But it's not, because Geddy seems to be this influence in the middle, tying this up into a holy trinity. Now, Rush were very serious in the early days. They're very frivolous now. Watching this concert that happened last night, it of course started with some big, almost like Hollywood film now, with lots of comedy in and lots of surreal humour, especially the most surrealism coming from Alex. It's absolutely wonderful stuff. But we sat there thinking, what's going to happen? Is Anika going to be able to pull it off? What's going to happen? Well, you know they're going to be able to pull it off. We're not dealing with any other rock band, all right? Alex and Geddy are in their 70s, but you're talking about Rush, right? Their abilities, it's unbelievable, Alex and Geddy's abilities, all right? So you sat there, I know he's going to be all right, Annika can play anything, but I'm still feeling nervous as I watch the video, and this sort of video wall's in front, and it basically comes down to this sort of blue fire, cold fire almost, a cold fire, a rejuvenating fire, almost like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And as it does, it comes up, and we're in, and this was the shock for me. Start the gig, Xanadu. You know, Xanadu is, if you take Rush's journey, they start off as a power trio, and then they start to develop. Neil Peart comes in, the lyrics change, and they descend upwards to their most progressive, which happens on Farewell to Kings. And then a new aesthetic comes and they go out. Within that, they expand what they're doing. And it's still the 70s, you know, no one's pulling this together with digital audio technologies and, you know, Pro Tools. So by the time they get to Farewell to Kings, they're in the studio at Rockfield and they're trying to pull this tune off. Now, Xanadu is an epic with so many different voices and colours and different approaches to playing music. And yet they had to work out a way they could play it live. So the Rockfield performance is pretty much played live. But this is an example of Rush at their most difficult in terms of pulling the music off. Now, we'd seen the band before and they came up with a track that didn't feel featured in it. It was like a Canadian awards ceremony where they came out and did Finding My Way. A very apt title, really, when you think of it. Brilliant. That was the last time we saw them, or the first time we saw them with Anika. So we've seen Find My Way, a rock tune. Now they're opening up the gig with Xanadu. They've never done this before. So with all that dry ice, it feels like they're being reborn, right? Xanadu is this idea of the folly of trying to be reborn into eternal life in a way. The folly of maybe of what they're doing. The film that preceded it had all had references to a Xanadu, but their Xanadu was sort of a bit cobwebby and almost like Citizen Kane's, what was his? Was his called Kubla Khan? So there's a reference to Citizen Kane here. And this is all very they're parodying themselves. It's almost like they're going, can you believe we're doing this again at our age? But here we are, we're doing it. It's almost like that, but in an incredibly theatrical and emotive way. They kick off. So Annika is sat there, and I can see on her face, actually got more chops than anybody can bloody wish for. But there she is. And she goes into those big fills at the beginning. So the thing with Xanadu is it's very interesting because Rush are known as being this band which everything's worked out. But Xanadu, the sort of this modal drone at the start, although structured, it's not bar structured. So it's all done on feel. The drone starts up, the dry ice is bubbling away, and then Alex comes in with his volume pedal, and he's swelling these notes in, and he creates it. Once they've created the thing, they start going. And the first thing Annika has to do, I think, is to hit the chime. Now with this, again, he looks around at her and he hits the bass on the chimes, and they do that quite regularly as though they're creating this sort of bond between them. And then she starts to have to hit the fills, Now those fills, if you listen to them, it's Neil Peart arrangement at its best. Because he's not quite, but he almost goes, the first fill goes, bang, bang, so it's like 1, 2, and then so it has 2 parts to it, and then he plays the next one, it's 3 parts, da da da, 3 parts, then da 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 da, and that's 4 parts, and then he doubles it, digga 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 bang, and that is beautiful in its structure. Then he goes back to the beginning, and this time he's all over the place, and the fills are doing all types of stuff. And if you watch, Annika goes into a fill right at the start of that gig, and as she flies around the toms, she loses a stick. The stick comes out of her hand, it flies up in mid-fill, she grabs it and carries on. She then covers it. She is no longer following the structure of Neil Peart, she's just doing fills to get through it. Then she gets back on track. As I'm watching this with my assumption that she's going to be able to nail, Annika can do it, then you suddenly realize, no, this is something else. Now that happens to everybody. But at that point, so I'm very aware as a musician, as she comes out of that, she goes, I thought if that was me now, that would be the beginning of a nervous breakdown. All right, I've got 2.5 hour show to start. I've been practicing it. I know I can pull it off, but here I am. It's not a question of technique. It's a question of balls. How big are my balls? Well, I have to be honest, they're not as big as Anika's, because straight away I could see on her face, it had not fazed her whatsoever. She was like a warrior. And within the next bar, she was back in. This is the hallmark of a great musician. Yes, she's got chops. Yes, she's got more chops than Neil Peart. But Neil had that as well. Neil had that as well. The ability to pull this off, right? And this is something that is never explained to non-musicians, right? When you're up on stage, the difficulty is not playing the stuff, it's playing the stuff on stage. And there's so many people that can't do that, right? They can play and they can do all the parts, but when put into that situation, I've seen it. I've seen literally drummers when I was doing drum clinics, and they're very pressured situations. I've seen drummers who can really play, like literally going, I can't move my hands. Their hands are frozen solid out of fear of what they're about to do. It requires a Zen-like focus. And when something happens like that, you have to shed it from your mind. I remember playing a progressive rock festival once with a progressive rock band called Neo. It was like a sort of, I would love to say it was a super group, but it was more like a karaoke prog band. Rozfest was a really important festival out in the States, and we were headlining it. And I cocked up the ending of a big epic. And I covered it, but then I did that thing where I was almost like rehearsing the reason why it's happened, rather than just owning it and going, you made a mistake. I was going, well, that happened because of this. I was almost imagining after the gig. So while I'm thinking about it, we get to the end of the track, and then I completely forget that there's a big crash at the end of this track, and everybody he's looking at me, and then I'll sort of come to my senses and look at them all, and they're all staring at me. I'm making a worse mistake in contemplating the mistake that went before. And then John Jarrett, my close friend and partner in crime in IQ and Frost, he said, well, I have to say what he said. He went, play the ending, C-U-N-T. That's basically what he said. And that sort of jolted me into like doing this. That's my feeling watching these videos of this Rush gig. So my point is here. Hang on. I've just got to check the window. But I've got a delivery. You lot stay there. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. This is why I'm not at my studio, I'm at home, because I've been waiting for this package to come. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I got this precisely because of listening to Rush and then watching this, not so much watching this gig, but contemplating. It actually came out of the thing we did, Butterfly Mind. I'm in a band with Tim Bonus called Butterfly Mind. If you want to check out, we've just put in studio. I just ran downstairs I thought the postman was going to go. Then they go and put it down next door. Then you got to go around next door. So I run as fast as I can, and I'm puffed. But anyway, me contemplating what I do as a drummer has got me to order this. That really goes back to Neil Peart. What do we do as a drummer? What do we do as a musician? What do we bring to the band? Can we bring more than just the drumming or just the guitar playing? How do we get involved in what the band's about? What is the band about? Once you know what your music and your band are about, how much are you going to stand up for it and how much are you going to cave and conform? Rush never conformed, did they? They never caved. They stood their ground. You know, when faced with all the criticism from the label after Caress of Steel, they stood their ground. In fact, they dug in deeper. They didn't care. They were ready to have to go back to the normal life. Alex knew he was going to go back and become an electrician or plumber, whatever it was with his dad. That was what his future was. And they dug in. And that's a glorious thing. That's a glorious thing. It's easy to feel that if you're like I don't know, the people I rail against, which I shouldn't really, but the Lou Reeds and the Van Morrisons and the Velvet Undergrounds and the Patti Smiths and the Bruce Springsteens and the Bob Dylans, all that stuff that the establishment think is absolute genius. And in some cases it could well be. But it's very easy to do your thing when the music press is supporting you all along the line. The only problem is then is that they want you to do what you've always done and you can't change. Rush never had that. Rush could always change because they never sold their soul to the devil. They always did what they wanted to do. And for me, the genius of Rush was Neil. Could he have done it without Alex and Geddy? No, they're so super talented and so brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But we know Neil coming into that band in 1974, what he brought into it was more than just being a great drummer. And I find that very inspirational to me personally. The fact that he was not scared to be intelligent, to question things, philosophy, go into mysticism, to go into sort of fantasy, Tolkien, dystopian science fiction. The the drive to do what you think is right. I think it's these things that have won out with Rush. So I already wanted to do this video, and I wanted to talk about Neil Peart. I wanted to explain his genius. His drumming is, especially on those albums, starting with, I would say, Farewell to Kings through to Signals. His drumming is absolutely beautiful. It's incredibly hard to do. It's incredibly hard to do because it's technically hard to do. There's no two ways about that. You're jumping through time signatures and all sorts of different things. And but also, it's those parts have to be played a certain way. You can't just get through with getting through the tune. You have to play some respect to the parts he played, a great deal of respect. Not every drummer's like that. Some drummers will do that every now and then. You know, it's a sign of greatness when you know you have to play that fill a certain way, or the audience are going to go, well, this isn't the song. They're not playing the song anymore. So for all my criticism of Neil Peart over the years, which I wanted to balance here on this video, because why did I do that? Because Rush fans are fanatics, and they just be categorically that Neil Peart's the greatest drummer in the world. And a lot of them there are going, oh yeah, Annika's really good because she pulled off Neil Peart's parts. They see it like that because Neil's the greatest drummer in the world. That's how they see it. They can't envisage anybody having more technique than Neil Peart. God knows how they ever watch, say, a Matt Garska video and see what that bloke does, you know. And Neil was never like that. Neil was humble enough, and I don't think he did this because he thought he was a bad drummer, but after he did the Buddy Rich tribute and he saw the likes of Simon Phillips and Steve Gadd and all those guys that were on the bill, he went to Freddie Gruber and he got lessons. Now, I don't think those lessons did much for him. In fact, I think, in a way, did him some bad. And this is another video. You see, I'm so involved in this band. I've so lived through this all, and it's all so close to me that every aspect of Rush is a major talking point for me. I hope it is for you too, because that's how important the band was. That's how important the band was. Every aspect of it. I am probably going to end up on this video doing 100, 200 videos on Rush, because they inspire me all the time. They inspire me. It's incredible. So, what did Rush bring to the table musically? What did Neil bring? What did we see last night? How do we sum this up with this phrase? Infinite possibilities. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Rush. Thank you, Annika. And thank you to the powers that be that I was able to be around when this band was around and I got to see them live with Neil. What a privilege. And I hope this video, as you know, as we all celebrating their brilliance and watching all the videos of them live back on stage again, I hope it's provided a little bit of extra Rush celebration for you, which has entertained you. But remember, if I have entertained you, in more ways than one, it is entirely off the genius and legacy and inspiration, continual inspiration that I get from the band Rush. Rush, not only the greatest progressive rock band of all time, but perhaps the greatest rock band of all time. Am I wrong? Who's better?